Welcome to the Book of Urm, Chapter 3, Massacre. The caravan made their camp just outside of the nomadic Banwa elves, who lived their lives following the herds of the great beasts across the sprawling grasslands of Undying Lands, east of Sienya. Banwa huts, tents, paddocks, and other temporary structures went on as far as the eye could see, with fires large and small dissolving like a carpet of blinking embers toward the night's horizon. The red moon rose high that night, open and aware, so it could survey with casual ambivalence all that occurred below, bathing the lands in crimson. Many stories exist in Cananaya of failed attempts to meet the Banwa and trade with them. It is thought among Canonian scholars that the Banwa are highly temperamental isolationists, trading only with the Xienyans from time to time. Canonian commoners, on the other hand, thought the Banwa to only exist in myth and folk tale, wild and savage elves who roamed the windy savannah, steeped in strange shamanic traditions and totemic spirits, coexisting with great herds of horned thunder beasts and soaring birds of prey the size of horses. The mere mention of the Banwa conjures fantastical whimsies among the collective Canonian imagination. Therefore, the notion that the Banwa traded exclusively with Sienya only helps emphasize the Canonian prejudice of Xienyans as also unruly and savage. Some attribute Sienya's own societal spirituality, the identification and worship of 6 specific animal spirits, or totems named bear, boar, bull, horse, serpent, and stag, as originating from Banwa influence. In truth, the Banwa are an ancient line of elves, long split from their origins within Kiahalla, the encircling forest, which is the great fey wood that has existed since the beginning of time, according to the records of the Eldar, far to the south of both Banwa lands and Sienya. What compelled the split among the Eldar and ancient elves is lost to the decay of time and memory, except for the Eldar themselves, the Scythians, or the High Elves, who are immortal. Within the bright halls of Aeonwyrm, the crystal city on top of the hill of Gurai, which rests in the center of the encircling forest, they have records of everything that has happened in the world within their purview since their creation in the beginning of recorded time. The split, or the dispersion, created not only present-day Banwa, the Plains Elves, but also the Sunshiu, the Canyon Elves, far to the west and south of Cananaya, and the Elgin Elves, the Wood Elves, in the forested mountains of the northwest, as well as many other transient elves, or common elves, grey elves, like those who live in many places, including Cananaya. None of this, of course, was known to most Canonians, except maybe a few in secret places, living in obscurity. To most Canonians, talk of Cynthia, the Undying Lands, the city of Aeonwyrm, and the dreadful fey forest of Kiahalla that encircles it was all fairy tales to be spread as light allegory or used to frighten children. The company that traveled this far east was lesser now, having suffered losses from the chaotic wilderness that exists between Cananaya and Sienya. They said that the lands changed, too slow for one to notice. But nonetheless, the forests slowly marched on, mountains rumbled along, rivers and lakes moved about the lands on their own, and altogether the wild lands were different each time one traveled through them. Thus, no map has ever been drawn of the wild lands, for they were unmappable. But a few guides existed who possessed the skills and capabilities to navigate these strange lands for a high price. One such guide was with Serpendis's company, but he perished within the second week of their trip. Morale was low among the mercenaries, and Serpendis Endium alone remained of the merchants and their assistants who set out upon this venture. He was vaguely beginning to fear for his own life, thinking that the remaining sellswords would turn on him and return home to loot his mansion. He knew that in order to maintain their allegiance, he had to make the trip lucrative for them, and he promised that once they found the Banwa, the elves would welcome them with exotic treasures to bring back home. Then they would stop in Siena on their way home to hire another guide, hopefully one better than the last, ensuring their safe return. But on this night, he listened to them sleep in their blankets and bedrolls around the dying embers of their fire, while his mind calculated. Earlier that day, upon discovering the vast nation of the Banwa far greater than any of them expected from a distant hill, he assured his remaining travelers that he would go alone to the Banwa the following day and present himself as representative of Cananaya, humankind of the West, and to beseech trade with them, hoping to broker a long-standing agreement between their people and his own. He had no translator, as she died along the journey with their guide. But among Serpentis Endium's greatest assets was his confidence in his own charisma, and he knew that only good fortune would come from his meeting with the Banwa. Such was the extent of his ambitions earlier that day. But tonight he crouched through the tall grasses and quietly moved away from the camp under the cover of rising Rubramiluna, the Canonian name for the red moon in its fullness. He was heading back to where he guessed would be the thing that he sought. Beneath the stars and the provocative glare of the red moon, he roamed around in circles until he found it, a large beast, almost the size of a small house, long dead, with white bones reaching into the sky, lying on its side with its belly vacated of all its innards. They found the beast 2 days ago, and the mercenaries became nervous, with one saying its presence meant they were very near Banwa lands, that they might already be watching them, so caution was warranted. They traveled around the huge carcass in a wide arc without speaking a word. Their eyes nervously surveyed the surrounding hills and tall grasses, keeping the beast and the circling vultures overhead barely within eyesight. But Serpentis, curious by nature, was desperate to find anything that might cure the restlessness of his adventurers. A few pieces of ivory chiseled from the fallen beast would fetch a high price in the markets of Coast Haven, his hometown in Cananaya. Warily, Serpentis slowly crept from the tall grass into the trampled, blood-caked surroundings of the gigantic, dead monster. His eyesight had grown accustomed to the soft red hue of Rubramiluna, bathing everything in eerie crimson tints, offset by shades of impenetrable darkness. The resulting hellish landscape, seemingly lit by blood, induced symptoms of anxiety, lack of balance, and irritability. The red moon was the moon between Lunami and Terra, as Canonians called it, and its presence in the night sky foretold unexpected events, intoxication to straightforward thoughts, confusion in conversation, and overall it seemed as though anything that touched its crimson light was subject to its unsettling influence, to many who believed in such things. As Serpentis quietly approached the fallen beast, the red moon revealed hints and implications of things that caused him to pause nervously. The stomach of the giant creature was gutted open, large enough for a person to enter and stand fully erect. But now, looking around anxiously, he noticed that the trampled debris field was perfectly circular, and the behemoth lay at its center, lying on its side. Within the excavated underbelly of the creature, Rubramiluna exposed for his squinting eyes glints of crimson highlights that suggested metals and crystals arranged intentionally. His mouth had gone bone dry, and he licked his lips as he approached the creature's gaping belly across the trampled grass ritual circle, his sandals softly crunching coagulated blood and dried offal under his weight. He expected an overpowering stench of death, but instead his sinuses received a wispy tendril of incense, both strange and comforting, emerging from the creature's carcass. Upon arriving at the belly, his fears and theories were realized. A shrine, or an altar of some sort, had been constructed within the cavity of the beast's hollowed insides, composed of bone, sinew, and flesh from the beast itself, as well as foreign materials like wood and fabric. Looking up, the red moon revealed to him in nebulous scarlet the fabricated imitation of the beast itself, rising on its hind legs and roaring at the sky. At its base was a shallow bowl made from reeds, and within the bowl smouldered the embers of the incense he detected. He nearly fainted with fear as his mind wrestled with the implications of his discovery. But there before him, worked into the giant sculpture as if to commemorate the killing of this creature, were precious gems, metals of many kinds, and even Xianyan coins. Some hung by strings, quietly clinking together like soft chimes. Others were nestled around the incense bowl, and still others were woven within the structure of the sculpture itself. Was this some totem erected in tribute to this creature? Did they worship it as if it were their god? Was this even the work of the Banwa, or was it Xianyan, or something else? Serpendis gazed at the altar, summarizing the small fortune before him. A small part of him from his distant, superstitious past berated him for even thinking of stealing anything from this sacred place. But he quickly distilled this fear with well-practiced logic and reason, ultimately deciding there was no way he could return to camp without taking something for each of the survivors traveling with him, as well as a few things for himself. With one last defiant glance up at the red moon filling the sky above him, he knelt and began gathering the treasures and trinkets left by the Banwa war party 3 days prior. When he was satisfied with his collection, he turned back and jogged across the circle, but when he reached the edge, he heard a distant scream that froze him in his tracks. He turned his head and focused his hearing, and from somewhere in the night he heard more screams and slaughter. He broke into a run, and cresting a hill he saw flames below, enveloping his camp and caravan, trapping his companions. No sounds of fighting or even resistance reached him, only dying. Serpendis blindly ran from the slaughter in no particular direction that he understood. He ran for days without eating or drinking, haunted every moment by the screams of his fellow travelers. He could identify and name each one, and without any idea of how to survive in the wild, especially without any gear, he knew that soon he would be among the rest of the party, not returning home, thereby finally concluding this expedition in catastrophic failure. There would be no tale, no song, nothing at all known or even rumored of his disappearance, as there would be nobody chronicling his final days able to share it with anyone. And this would only further strain the relations between Kananaya and Sienya, not to mention exacerbate fears of traveling across the wildlands, and the Banwa would continue to exist within the fringes of Canonian imagination. All of this filled him with dread as he finally collapsed at the bottom of a misty, muddy vale between 2 exposed buttes piercing the steplands below. Miraculously, a Sienyan scouting patrol found him while riding beyond Sienya's eastern border. As this valley was part of their route, they nearly trampled the fallen old man with their horses. At the last moment, the lead rider quickly raised his hand and pulled hard on the reins, causing many of the riders behind him to struggle for control of their own horses. Seeing that he still lived, and recognizing with disbelief that he was a Canonian so impossibly far from his home, they carried him back to Sienya's only city, Tilamark. During his rehabilitation, Serpendis spoke of the savage butchery of his travel companions at the hands of the merciless Banwa, to the discomfort of the Sienyan people around him, and that, by only the grace of his gods, he alone escaped and was rescued. Thank you for listening to this chapter from the Book of Urm. If you enjoyed this reading, like and subscribe to our channel, and consider supporting us at the Book of Urm at patreon.com.